The hardest secrets are never hidden inside locked rooms. They are hidden inside ordinary faces you think you have never seen before. I never imagined that agreeing to foster one quiet 16-year-old girl would unravel a story that had been waiting more than 20 years to find its way back to my family. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 43 years old, and until 6 months ago my life followed a predictable rhythm. I taught history at the local high school in a small Ohio town, spent weekends restoring old furniture in my garage, and believed my life had become comfortably ordinary after my divorce. I had never planned to become a foster parent, but life has a way of placing unexpected responsibilities in front of people who think their biggest chapters have already been written. Grace Miller from Child Protective Services called me late on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Her voice sounded gentle but tired. She explained that a 16-year-old girl named Emma Collins had recently lost her mother after a long illness. There were no close relatives willing or able to care for her, and the agency was searching for a temporary foster home while they determined what would happen next. I remember staring through my kitchen window as rain slid slowly down the glass. I asked Grace only one question. Does she have anywhere else to go tonight? There was a long silence before she quietly answered, no. That single word settled the decision before I realized I had made it. 2 days later, I drove to the county office to meet Emma. She was much smaller than I expected, standing quietly beside a worn blue suitcase with both hands wrapped tightly around the handle as though letting go might cause everything else in her life to disappear too. She did not cry. She did not complain. She simply thanked every employee who wished her well before walking toward me with remarkable composure for someone who had just lost everything familiar. Grace introduced us, and Emma offered a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. During the drive home, we exchanged only a few simple conversations. She answered every question respectfully, but never volunteered more than necessary. She enjoyed reading mystery novels. She liked drawing birds. She had attended 3 different schools during the previous 5 years because her mother often moved for work. Beyond those small details, she remained almost completely silent. I respected that silence because grief arrives differently for every person. When we reached my house, she carefully carried her own suitcase inside before looking around the living room with quiet curiosity. It was an ordinary home with old hardwood floors, family photographs, shelves filled with books, and the smell of fresh coffee that seemed permanently woven into the walls. I showed her the guest bedroom I had spent the previous evening preparing with clean bedding, fresh towels, and a small reading lamp beside the bed. She thanked me again with the same gentle politeness that made me wonder how many disappointments had already taught her not to expect too much from strangers. Before unpacking, she reached into the front pocket of her suitcase and removed a framed photograph. She placed it carefully on the bedside table without saying a word. I noticed only briefly that it showed Emma standing beside a smiling woman with warm eyes and dark hair. I assumed it was her mother and quietly closed the bedroom door to give her privacy. Later that evening, I prepared a simple dinner. Emma ate slowly, complimented the meal, and offered to help wash the dishes before disappearing back into her room with a novel she had carried inside her backpack. As I passed her open doorway an hour later, I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed holding the framed photograph in both hands. She was not crying. She was simply looking at her mother's face as though memorizing every detail all over again. Something about that quiet moment stayed with me long after I went to sleep. I realized fostering was never simply about providing a roof over someone's head. Sometimes it meant becoming the steady place where another person could begin breathing again after life had taken away everything they believed would always be there. I had no way of knowing that the photograph resting on Emma's bedside table would soon change not only her future but the history of my own family as well. The first week with Emma was quieter than I expected. I had prepared myself for difficult conversations, emotional moments, and the possibility that she might struggle adjusting to a new home. What I was not prepared for was how much strength could exist inside someone so young. Emma never demanded attention. She never complained about missing things she had lost. Instead, she woke up every morning, made her bed, thanked me for breakfast, and quietly tried to make herself as easy to care for as possible. After years of teaching teenagers, I recognized that behavior immediately. It was the kind of independence people develop when they have learned not to rely on anyone too much. I wanted her to understand that my home was not a place where she had to earn kindness. One evening, while we were preparing dinner together, I asked her about the photograph she kept beside her bed. She stopped cutting vegetables for a moment and looked toward the hallway. "That is my mom," she said softly. "Her name was Sarah." I smiled and asked what Sarah was like. For the first time, Emma's expression changed. A small warmth appeared in her eyes. She told me her mother loved old movies, collected handwritten recipes, and always played music while cooking. She described a woman who worked hard, laughed easily, and never allowed difficult circumstances to take away her hope. "She always told me that people are more than the hardest things that happen to them," Emma said. That sentence stayed with me because it sounded like something my own mother would have said. Over the next few weeks, small pieces of Emma's life began to appear. She kept a journal filled with drawings and memories. She saved every birthday card her mother had ever given her. She carried a small envelope filled with photographs that she refused to let get damaged. I never pressured her to share more than she wanted. Trust is not something you request from someone who has already lost so much. It is something you build slowly through consistency. A month after Emma moved in, I invited my older brother Michael over for dinner. Michael and I had always been close, but we lived different lives. He worked as a financial advisor in a nearby city and was the type of person who noticed every detail around him. When he arrived, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table organizing her school papers. Michael greeted her warmly and asked about her classes. Everything seemed completely normal until Emma's photograph slipped from her notebook and landed on the floor. Michael bent down to pick it up. The moment his eyes reached the picture, his entire expression changed. He did not say anything at first. He simply stared at the photograph as if he had just seen something impossible. "Where did you get this?" he finally asked. His voice was quieter than usual. Emma looked confused. "It is my mom. She passed away a few months ago." Michael slowly handed the picture back to her, but he looked completely different from the man who had walked through my front door minutes earlier. I noticed his face had lost its color. "What was your mother's full name?" he asked. Emma hesitated before answering. "Sarah Collins." The room became silent. I looked at my brother, trying to understand what had just happened. Michael stepped away from the table and looked toward the photograph again. "I knew someone named Sarah Collins a long time ago," he said, "but I never thought I would see her face again." That was the moment I realized Emma's story was connected to something from my brother's past. Something he had never told me. Something that had been hidden for more than 20 years. And as Michael stood there trying to find the right words, I knew our quiet foster arrangement had just become something far more complicated than any of us expected. After Emma quietly excused herself to finish her homework upstairs, I closed the kitchen door and turned toward Michael. He remained standing beside the table, staring at the empty chair where Emma had been sitting only moments earlier. I had known my brother my entire life, and I had rarely seen him look genuinely shaken. "You are going to tell me what just happened," I said calmly. Michael rubbed both hands across his face before taking a slow breath. "Daniel, I have spent more than 20 years convincing myself that chapter of my life was over." He sat down heavily and looked toward the family photograph Emma had accidentally left on the table. Sarah Collins was not just someone I knew. She was one of the most important people I ever met. I remained silent, allowing him the space to continue. "We met when we were both in college," he said quietly. "She volunteered at a community literacy program, and I helped tutor children after classes. She believed every person deserved a second chance, even when life seemed unfair. That was simply who she was." The more he spoke, the more surprised I became. Michael had never mentioned her name before. Our family had shared holidays, birthdays, road trips, and countless conversations over the years, yet Sarah Collins had never once entered those memories. "What happened?" I finally asked. Michael looked down at his hands. "Life happened. After graduation, I accepted a job in another state because I thought building a career was the responsible choice. Sarah wanted to stay close to her mother, whose health was already beginning to decline. We promised we would make the distance work." He smiled sadly. We were young enough to believe promises alone could solve everything. According to Michael, they exchanged letters for several months before the communication suddenly stopped. His letters were returned unopened. Phone calls were never answered. Eventually, he believed Sarah had decided to move on with her life. He admitted that the silence hurt deeply, but he respected what he believed was her decision. "I never stopped wondering why," he whispered. But after enough years, you tell yourself some questions simply never receive answers. I looked toward the staircase, thinking about Emma reading quietly in her room, completely unaware that her mother's past had unexpectedly walked into my kitchen. "Do you think Emma knows any of this?" I asked. Michael slowly shook his head. "From what she said, I doubt it. If Sarah never mentioned me, there had to be a reason." That answer only created more questions. The next morning, after Emma left for school, I called Grace Miller. I explained that someone in my family recognized Sarah's photograph and asked whether the agency had any information about her earlier life. Grace apologized but explained that confidential records contained only limited background information. Sarah had worked several jobs, moved frequently, and had raised Emma alone for most of her daughter's life. There was no mention of extended family, close relatives, or longtime friends. She kept her personal history remarkably private, Grace said. After hanging up, I found myself standing outside Emma's bedroom door. It remained exactly as she left it, neatly organized with books stacked carefully beside the bed. The framed photograph still rested on the nightstand. This time I looked at it more closely. Sarah smiled warmly with one arm around Emma, who appeared to be about 10 years old. There was nothing unusual about the picture, yet I now understood why Michael had gone pale. He had not recognized a stranger. He had recognized someone he once believed would always be part of his future. That evening, Michael called me again. "I searched through boxes in my attic today," he said. "I found something." The following afternoon, he arrived carrying a weathered cardboard box filled with old notebooks, photographs, and neatly tied bundles of letters. He placed everything on my dining room table before carefully removing one faded photograph from an envelope. My heart stopped for a moment. The young woman smiling beside my brother in that photograph was unmistakably Sarah. She looked almost exactly like the woman in Emma's framed picture, only younger. On the back, written in neat blue ink, were 6 simple words that changed everything. "Always believe the truth finds us eventually." The photograph on my dining room table changed the way I looked at my brother forever. For years, I thought Michael was the person in our family who had everything figured out. He was older, more experienced, and always seemed confident about every decision he made. But as he sat across from me holding a picture of Sarah, I saw something different. I saw someone carrying a question he had never been able to answer. Michael carefully placed the photograph beside the others from the old box and began explaining the details he had spent decades trying to forget. After their relationship ended, he said he continued searching for answers. He wrote letters to Sarah, but they were returned. He contacted old friends, but no one knew where she had gone. Eventually, he accepted that she had chosen a different path and moved forward with his life. Yet a small part of him always wondered whether there was more to the story. "I never hated her," Michael told me. "I just never understood why someone who mattered so much could disappear without a word." I looked at the photograph again and thought about Emma sitting upstairs, completely unaware that the people from her mother's past were standing in the same house. The situation felt impossible, but I knew one thing clearly. Whatever happened years ago, Emma deserved the truth handled with care. The next day, Michael and I decided to look through every item inside the old box. We were not searching for a dramatic revelation. We were simply trying to understand the connection between 2 people whose lives had somehow crossed again through Emma. Inside the box were old letters, concert tickets, handwritten notes, and several photographs from a time when Michael and Sarah were young. One letter caught my attention because it was never sent. The envelope had Michael's handwriting, but there was no address written on the front. "I wrote this after I realized I might never hear from her again," he explained. I asked if he wanted to read it. He hesitated before opening the letter. The words inside revealed how much confusion and sadness he had carried. He wrote that he hoped Sarah was safe, that he hoped she found happiness, and that he wished he had known the reason behind their separation. There was no anger in his words, only uncertainty. That detail surprised me because it showed the kind of person Michael had always been. He was not someone searching for someone to blame. He was someone looking for closure. Later that afternoon, Emma came home from school and noticed the photographs on the table. She stopped when she saw her mother in the pictures. "Where did you find those?" she asked. Her voice was not frightened, but she was clearly curious. I looked at Michael before answering. We both knew this conversation had to be handled carefully. "Your mother knew someone from our family many years ago," I said. Emma looked between us. "My mom never talked about many people from her past." That sentence stayed with me. It confirmed what Grace had told me. Sarah had intentionally kept much of her history private. But why? What had she been protecting? That evening, Emma sat with us and shared more memories about her mother. She described how Sarah kept old letters in a small wooden box and always told her that some stories should be understood before they are judged. Hearing those words made Michael and me exchange a quiet glance. Sarah had known that one day questions might return. She had prepared for that possibility in her own way. The mystery surrounding her past was no longer just about Michael. It was about understanding the choices a mother made while raising her daughter. And somewhere among those old letters and forgotten memories was the answer we had all been searching for. The answer we were searching for did not come from a dramatic discovery. It came from a quiet afternoon when Emma finally decided she was ready to open the small wooden box her mother had left behind. For weeks, that box had remained untouched in her room. She told me she had carried it from house to house after losing her mother, but she never had the courage to look inside. I think part of me was afraid of finding out there was nothing left, she admitted. I understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes people hold on to memories because they are afraid the truth might change the way they remember someone they love. That evening, Emma brought the box downstairs and placed it on the dining room table where Michael and I were waiting. She did not ask us to open it. She wanted to do it herself. Inside were several envelopes, a collection of old photographs, and a small journal with Sarah's handwriting on the cover. Emma carefully lifted each item, recognizing some memories immediately and discovering others for the first time. The first envelope contained letters Sarah had written to Emma throughout her childhood. Most were simple notes filled with encouragement, reminders to stay kind, and stories about ordinary moments they shared together. Then Emma found a sealed envelope with Michael's name written on the front. The room became completely silent. Michael looked at the envelope as if he had been transported back more than 20 years. I never knew she kept anything connected to me, he whispered. Emma looked uncertain. Should I open it? Michael took a slow breath before answering. Only if you want to know the truth. She carefully opened the envelope and removed the letter inside. The handwriting belonged to Sarah. As Emma read silently, her expression slowly changed. She looked confused at first, then surprised, then emotional. After a few minutes, she handed the letter to me. Sarah had written that she never forgot Michael, but circumstances had separated them in a way neither of them expected. Years earlier, when Sarah discovered she was pregnant, she tried to contact Michael. However, a misunderstanding caused their messages to never reach each other. Sarah believed Michael had chosen not to be involved, while Michael believed Sarah had chosen to leave him behind. Neither person had known the other was waiting for answers. The letter explained that Sarah eventually decided to raise Emma on her own because she wanted to provide stability and protect her daughter from uncertainty. She never spoke negatively about Michael. Instead, she wrote that she hoped one day Emma would learn that some people leave our lives not because they stop caring, but because life creates circumstances they cannot control. Michael lowered the letter after reading it. His eyes were filled with regret, but also relief. All these years, I thought she walked away from me, he said quietly. She thought the same thing about me. Emma looked at him carefully. Did you love my mom? It was a simple question, but it carried years of hidden emotions. Michael nodded. Yes, I did. And I am sorry I never got the chance to tell her that I never stopped wishing her well. Emma sat quietly for a moment before reaching across the table and placing her hand over the letter. She was not searching for a replacement for the mother she lost. She was simply trying to understand the person her mother had been before she became only a memory. That night changed everything. The mystery was no longer about a forgotten relationship between two adults. It was about a mother who carried unanswered questions, a man who lived with regret, and a daughter who deserved to know the full story of where she came from. As I watched Emma carefully place the letter back inside the wooden box, I realized something important. Families are not always connected only by the people who are present. Sometimes they are connected by the stories, sacrifices, and love that survive long after people are gone. The days after we read Sarah's letter felt different in ways that were difficult to describe. The mystery that had brought our lives together had finally begun to make sense, yet none of us celebrated. Instead, we found ourselves quietly reflecting on how easily two good people could spend decades believing the wrong story. Michael visited more often than he ever had before. He did not come because he believed he could rewrite the past. He came because he genuinely wanted to know Emma, not as someone connected to old memories, but as the remarkable young woman she had become. Emma remained cautious at first. Losing her mother had taught her that trust was fragile, and she was not ready to open her heart simply because new answers had appeared. I respected her pace, and so did Michael. Neither of us expected instant healing. One Saturday afternoon, Emma asked whether we could visit the small cemetery where Sarah had been buried. Michael immediately offered to stay behind if she preferred privacy, but Emma surprised both of us. "I think my mom would want both of you there," she said softly. The three of us drove together beneath a quiet autumn sky. Emma carried fresh white flowers while I carried a small wooden box containing the letters Sarah had written throughout her life. Michael walked several steps behind us, almost as though he felt he needed permission simply to stand there. When we reached the grave, Emma carefully placed the flowers beside the headstone and remained silent for several moments. Finally, she spoke. "Mom, I finally know why you always said people should never judge a story before hearing every chapter." Her words carried through the cool afternoon air with remarkable calm. Michael stepped forward slowly. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I am sorry that we lost so many years because of something neither of us understood. I hope you knew, somehow, that I never stopped wishing you happiness." There was no dramatic moment, no miracle, only a peaceful silence that somehow felt like the conversation all three of them had waited decades to have. Before we left, Emma removed one folded page from the wooden box. "She wanted me to read this only when I felt ready," she explained. The note was short, written in Sarah's familiar handwriting. She reminded Emma that life would always bring unexpected people into her path, and that the greatest measure of character was not how someone entered your life, but how they chose to remain when things became difficult. At the bottom, Sarah had written one final sentence. "If kindness ever brings you back to someone from my past, do not be afraid to let forgiveness finish what fear interrupted." Michael quietly wiped away a tear before looking toward me. Neither of us needed to speak. We both understood that Sarah had spent her final years preparing Emma not to carry bitterness into adulthood. Driving home, Emma sat in the back seat looking peacefully out the window instead of holding the photograph as tightly as she once had. That small change told me more than words ever could. She was no longer afraid that remembering her mother meant staying trapped inside grief. She had begun carrying Sarah's love forward instead of only carrying her loss. During the following weeks, Emma laughed more often, invited friends home after school, and slowly filled the empty spaces inside the house with ordinary teenage life. Michael became someone she trusted enough to ask for advice about college applications, career ideas, and even driving lessons. Watching them build a relationship free from old misunderstandings reminded me that families are sometimes created by choice just as much as by circumstance. Sarah's greatest sacrifice had not been living with unanswered questions. It had been making certain her daughter grew up believing in compassion instead of resentment. And as I watched Emma smile more easily each day, I realized Sarah's quiet courage had accomplished exactly what she hoped it would. Her love continued shaping the future long after her own journey had come to an end. The months that followed brought a kind of peace I had never expected when Emma first arrived at my home carrying only a blue suitcase and a photograph of her mother. Life did not suddenly become perfect. There were still difficult mornings, unanswered questions, and moments when grief returned without warning. But something important had changed. Emma no longer felt like a guest waiting for another transition. She had started to believe that she belonged. One evening, while we were sitting at the kitchen table finishing dinner, Emma looked at me and asked a question I had not expected. "Daniel, do you think my mom would be happy with everything that happened?" I put down my fork and thought carefully before answering. "I think your mom would be proud that you allowed yourself to accept kindness when life gave you a reason not to trust it." Emma looked down at her hands. "I used to think accepting a new family meant I was forgetting her." I shook my head. "Love does not disappear when your heart makes room for more people. Your mother is still part of you." That conversation stayed with me because it showed how much Emma had changed. She was no longer just surviving each day. She was beginning to imagine a future. Around that same time, Michael became more involved in her life. He helped her research colleges, shared stories about his own mistakes, and encouraged her artistic interests. I noticed something different about him too. For years, Michael had carried the belief that losing Sarah was simply something he had to accept without understanding. Now he was learning that forgiveness was not only something we offered others. Sometimes it was something we had to offer ourselves. One weekend, Michael invited Emma, a collection of items he wanted to share with her. On the table were old photographs, a few letters, and a journal filled with memories from his younger years. "I want you to know who your mother was before everything became complicated," he told Emma. "Not because you need to replace the memories you already have, but because she was a person with dreams, hopes, and a life before she became your mother." Emma listened carefully as Michael described Sarah's kindness, her sense of humor, and her ability to make strangers feel valued. She smiled when she heard stories that matched the woman she remembered. "That sounds exactly like her," Emma said. Later that afternoon, Michael handed Emma a small envelope. Inside was a letter he had written to Sarah years earlier, but never sent. He explained that he had kept it because throwing it away felt like giving up on a part of himself. Emma read the letter quietly. When she finished, she looked at him with understanding rather than sadness. "I think she would have wanted you to stop carrying this," she said. Michael took a deep breath and nodded. "I think you are right. That moment showed me something powerful." Emma had become the person helping heal the wounds created before she was even born. She did not blame anyone for the past. She simply wanted everyone she loved to move forward. Later that year, I completed the final steps of becoming Emma's permanent guardian. The decision was not made because she needed someone to replace her mother. No one could ever do that. It was made because family is not about erasing the people who came before. It is about honoring them while continuing to build a life filled with love. When Emma signed the final documents, she smiled and said, "I guess I finally have a place where I can stop wondering where I belong." Those words meant more to me than she probably realized. I thought back to the first night she arrived, standing at my front door with a small suitcase and a guarded expression. She had lost so much, but she had also brought something into our lives that none of us expected. She reminded Michael and me that people are connected not only by history, but by the choices they make. Afterward, Sarah's story had started with unanswered questions, but it was becoming something much more meaningful. It had become a story about compassion, second chances, and the family we choose when life gives us the opportunity to open our hearts. The first holiday season after Emma officially became part of our family felt different from every celebration before it. The house was filled with familiar sounds that had slowly become rare again. There was music playing in the kitchen, the smell of homemade food throughout the rooms, and the kind of laughter that does not need to be forced. For years after losing people we loved, our family gatherings had carried a quiet emptiness. This year felt like something had finally returned. Not the past, because none of us could bring back the years we lost, but a new beginning built from everything we had learned. Emma spent the morning helping me decorate the living room. She carefully placed ornaments on the Christmas tree while telling me stories about traditions her mother used to have. Some were simple things, like making a special dessert every December or watching the same holiday movie every year. I realized Sarah had given Emma something incredibly valuable. She had given her memories strong enough to carry her through difficult seasons. Later that afternoon, Michael arrived carrying a small wrapped package. When Emma saw him, she smiled immediately. That simple reaction showed me how far they had both come. There was a time when Michael was only a stranger connected to a painful mystery. Now he was someone Emma trusted enough to call when she needed advice. Michael handed her the package and told her it was not something expensive, but something meaningful. Inside was a small photo album he had created. He had collected pictures of Sarah from different stages of her life and added handwritten notes describing the moments he remembered. Emma slowly turned each page, smiling at the familiar face of her mother. "Thank you for keeping these," she said. Michael nodded. "I should have found a way to share them sooner." Emma looked at him and smiled. "Maybe we found them at the right time." Her answer surprised both of us because it reflected a wisdom far beyond her years. She understood something that many adults struggle to accept. Not every painful delay means something was lost forever. Sometimes time allows people to become ready for the truth. As the evening continued, Michael and I stepped outside for a few minutes while Emma prepared dessert inside. The cold air reminded me of the first night she arrived at my home. She had stood quietly at the doorway with a suitcase, unsure whether she was entering another temporary place or somewhere she could finally belong. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Michael asked. I smiled. more often than you would expect. He looked toward the window where Emma was laughing inside. She changed everything. I agreed. She had changed everything, but not because she solved an old mystery. She changed everything because she reminded us that family is not only about the people who share your history. It is about the people who choose to show up, listen, and stay. Before leaving that night, Michael gave Emma one final envelope. "Your mother wrote this years ago," he explained. "I found it among some old papers. I think she wanted you to have it when you were ready." Emma opened the letter after Michael left. She later told me that Sarah wrote about courage, kindness, and the importance of allowing good people into your life. She wrote that grief might change the shape of love, but it could never erase it. The next morning, I found Emma sitting by the window reading the letter again. She looked peaceful, not because she had forgotten her mother, but because she finally understood that love could exist in many forms at the same time. She had her mother's memories. She had a home. She had people who cared about her future. Watching her grow from a frightened teenager carrying a suitcase into a confident young woman, finding her place reminded me of something I had learned through this entire journey. Sometimes the people who enter our lives unexpectedly are not there to fill an empty space. They are there to help us discover parts of ourselves we never knew were missing. 2 years after Emma first arrived at my home with a small suitcase and a photograph of her mother, I found myself standing in the same living room where everything had begun. The walls looked different because Emma had slowly filled them with drawings, family pictures, and reminders of the life she was building. The house was no longer the quiet place where I lived alone after my divorce. It had become a home filled with conversations, memories, and the simple moments that make people feel connected. Looking back, I often thought about how unexpected the journey had been. I opened my door because a teenager needed somewhere safe to stay, but I never imagined she would become the person who helped my family understand forgiveness, patience, and the meaning of belonging. Emma was preparing to graduate from high school, and everyone gathered in the backyard to celebrate. Michael brought his camera, something he had started carrying more often because he wanted to capture the moments he once believed he had missed forever. He stood beside Emma with the kind of pride usually seen in parents watching their children reach important milestones. Although he was not replacing anyone in her life, he had become one of the people who helped guide her forward. During the celebration, Emma gave me a handwritten card. She told me to read it later because she wanted the words to be private. That evening, after everyone left and the house became quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Inside, Emma thanked me for giving her a place to heal when she felt like she had lost everything. She wrote that she used to believe losing her mother meant losing her entire future. But she learned that love does not disappear when someone is gone. It continues through the people who carry their kindness forward. Her words reminded me of the lesson Sarah had left behind without ever meeting me. A person can change another person's life through choices they make every day, even choices they never realize will matter years later. A few months later, Emma left for college. The morning she moved into her dorm, she placed the framed photograph of her mother on her desk before unpacking anything else. I smiled when I saw it because I understood what that meant. Sarah was not a painful memory she needed to leave behind. She was part of the foundation that helped Emma become who she was. Before I drove home, Emma hugged me and said something I will never forget. "Thank you for seeing me before you knew my story." That sentence stayed with me because it captured everything this journey had taught me. We often decide who people are based on the moments when they need help the most. But sometimes the people who appear broken are carrying incredible strength we have not yet seen. Years earlier, Michael believed he had lost Sarah forever. Emma believed she had lost her entire family. I believed I was simply offering temporary support to a teenager who needed a home. None of us understood that our lives were being connected by a story that began long before we knew each other's names. Today, the photograph of Emma and Sarah still sits in my living room beside pictures of our family. It reminds me of where we started and how much changed because one person chose kindness. I still think about that first rainy Thursday when Grace asked if I could help a young girl with nowhere else to go. I had no idea that opening my home would also open the door to a forgotten chapter of my brother's life, a hidden love story, and a lesson about family that I would carry forever. Emma did not come into my life to replace something that was missing. She came into my life and showed me that families can grow in ways we never expect. Sometimes the greatest connections are not the ones we are born into. They are the ones we choose to protect, nurture, and love. And sometimes the person who arrives needing a home ends up giving everyone else a place where they finally belong.